Next up, we're talking about Next in South Asia. And we have a very special guest. He's flown in from Washington, D.C. His name is Honorable Scott Faulkner, the former Chief Administrative Officer, U.S. House of Representatives. So let's give him a warm applause. Thank you, Scott. And I also have with me my colleague, Vineet Malhotra, who is going to be moderating this session.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Scott, thank you for coming for the next conclave. Just a bit of a background that me and Scott have gotten to know each other for the past couple of days. We hung out, went to the parliament, went to the Prime Minister's Museum as well. And of course, we got talking about, what your expertise is and what we do over here in India, and how your expertise is going to come handy in terms of basically reflecting on what the mood in South Asia is vis-a-vis, the change in administration in the United States. But first up, I want to address the elephant in the room. I had prepared a lot of questions, which was day before to ask you, but something happened yesterday, which has basically stolen the gaze of the world, and everybody is talking about it. Social media users are talking about it. Countries are responding, heads of states are responding as to what happened, and that was that very animated discussion between Vladimir Zelensky, President Donald Trump, and Vice President JD Vance. Do you think this was the first interaction of its sorts ever to happen in the Oval Office or anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world in history. I was doing some history research before this, anticipating the question. 1619, Prague, the defenestration of the Holy Roman Emperor's Catholic delegation. They were thrown out of a third-floor window and started the 30 Years' War. So that seems to be the last time there was this high-profile a meltdown for a diplomatic mission. So it's been quite a while, and that one wasn't on CNN. So it's just absolutely stunning. My phone started blowing up last night, and I have friends on both sides of the aisle, and you can imagine one side says it's Zelensky's fault, the other side says it's Trump's fault, and everyone's sort of throwing eggs and rotten tomatoes at each other.
Do you think it was about time that somebody called out Zelensky for what's happening?
Well, that's an interesting question, because what they're saying is that a deal was cut, and that this was supposed to have been sort of like a protocol meeting in preparation for the signing of the document dealing with mineral rights, and then they were going to go and do a press conference. And Zelensky decided to up the ante and sort of reopen the negotiations on the fly. Some of the people are saying that Zelensky was so used to working with Biden and his national security staff, which to this day is still probably the weakest and most incompetent in American history, and he wasn't ready to encounter the buzzsaw of Trump. And then as one person put it, with Trump and Vance there, it was bad cop, worse cop, instead of bad cop, good cop. And so Zelensky probably lost his cool when he shouldn't have, but both sides sort of upped the ante, and it's sad, because the only person actually two people benefit from it. Russia, because they hope that they can retain all their ill-gotten gains of territory and maybe force Ukraine to never be in NATO. And then China, that's sitting there saying, well, if this happens on Ukraine, maybe we ought to test our waters around Taiwan. So it was not one of the better moments for American history, world history, or in the future of the Ukraine now, is God knows what's going to happen.
All right, getting back to the discussion and the mold that we've been preparing for the last few days, you gave me a lot of interesting insights into what governments do and what governments emote and project in order to run efficiently. And you spoke about the 3 Ts.
Right.
I found that extremely fascinating. It would be amazing if you could just share that philosophy
Sure.
and that idea with our audience as well, and of course the people watching on TV.
Right. When you start to think of governance, we're not just talking about elections and who gets elected and who represents who. We're talking about the actual operations and mechanics of how a government operates, how it serves its citizenry. And you kind of hearken back to basically Rousseau in the 18th century about the social contract, that we all came here either by bus or car because we don't build our own cars. So we voluntarily hire a car or buy a car. So we have a transactional contract with that manufacturer. The same thing goes in government. None of us are going to sit there and build the roads that drive that car. We're willing to, through a toll or gas tax or something, delegate to government building the roads. We delegate to government the police and the signage on those roads. And so the social contract for government at every level, from national to federal to local, is that the citizens that it serves willingly delegate and willingly pay for certain basic services that we're not going to do ourselves. And so transaction is a very fundamental thing, because government needs to be able to make the value proposition that we can do certain things better than individuals because of collective action and economies of scale. Then we're into trust, the second T. We trust that government is going to do the right thing. Just like we all had a lunch break, we assumed that the food we ate was not going to kill us, give us food poisoning. So there's a certain trust level that comes with that social contract. And then finally, to establish that that trust is real and is actually justified, we have transparency. We want to know, public processes should be public, public documents should be public meetings should be public decisions should be public, and except, you put a little asterisk for we don't need to know the nuclear codes or some secret weapon being built or who the spies are, but overall, public things should be public. What's happened in America, and this goes back 30 plus years, both Republicans and Democrats are to blame, those 3 Ts have been destroyed. And that's what led to this last year's election, where America's faith in government, in that social contract, has completely collapsed because government has been lying to them. And we're finding that over the years, we basically have a government filled with aging, egotistical, greedy, corrupt people who have been lining their pockets, and this is where the DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency, comes in, peeling back the curtain, peeling back the onion to see the waste, the fraud, and the abuse. And the fact that we're about to have the full files of the Epstein, we're going to have the trial on P. Diddy. So we're not only looking at corruption, we're looking at perversion to a very sordid level. And so Americans today have little faith in government, little faith in the media that covers government, little faith in the academia that studies government. And this is probably the worst crisis in governance in American history. I mean, we had our Civil War, but that wasn't about governance. That was about very fundamental issues on freedom and sectional competition. So when you start to look at going back, and we're about to celebrate our 250th anniversary next year, that this is probably the worst crisis in American history. And that led to the revolt at the ballot box last fall with Trump getting in, and that also led to a very aggressive process of Trump cleaning house with some blunt instruments. We can talk about that. But to this day, I mean, just before I came here last week, the 77% of Americans are for what Musk is doing in terms of what we call draining the swamp and starting to expose all this waste. But the basics of governance that holds America together are right now in play, and we'll see how it plays out.
All right, well, let's take a minute and talk about Trump as well. You know, he's come up for the second time.
Mm-hmm.
He's, of course, excited. Some people say that he's also hyperbolic in what he wants to achieve. Do you think that, you know, the changes that he's advocating, do you think all the noise that is being made right now is superfluous to some extent in nature and is perhaps the result of the excitement of the president coming in for the second time? Or do you think there is really, the bang that we call to this buck?
This is only the second time in American history where a president wins, loses, and then wins again. Grover Cleveland was the last one back in the 1880s. So what Trump had was he had 4 years in the wilderness, in essence, and in court to realize what his mistakes were in the first term. In the first term, he did not remove all the Obama people. He did not bring in loyalists for himself. And so the result is he never truly had effective control of the executive branch. Now, that being said, he did a lot of deregulation, he did a lot of tax cuts, which stimulated the American economy, and he certainly did the brilliant initiative of the Abraham Accords. But a lot of other things could have happened and didn't, and the things that didn't happen ended up coming around to bite him, in essence, because of what people in America have called lawfare, where all these court cases and criminal cases came against him. So he had 4 years to sit there and say, okay, I screwed up. I mean, he will not admit that publicly, but I can guarantee you that behind the scenes he's sitting there saying, I screwed up. And one of the other things was the first term, his only inner circle was his family. So come around to 2024, and now he has a kitchen cabinet. He's got all these people who used to be, some of them were on-air talent on Fox News, but many of them have incredible credentials. And people who were fired up about Trump, wanting to basically drain the swamp, which did not fully happen the first time around. And so Trump is hitting the ground running with a team that hits the ground running. And thanks to Thune, Senator Thune, who's our majority leader in the Senate, Trump has filled in his cabinet in record time. In fact, was a faster confirmation of his appointments than what happened for Biden, what happened for Obama, what happened for Trump first term, and even what happened for Bush. So we now have, coming into the 1st of March, a full inner core of people who are loyal to Trump, share his zeal for reform, and feeling that there's a full mandate from the 2024 election that it's time to not just kick in the door, but kick over the table. And I really do feel that there's a sincerity to it. One of the things when I talk about and write about change, that time is the energy of change. The longer you wait to do something, the more the opposition forces are going to rally against you. So he knows he has to strike fast and strike on a broad front. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Absolutely. Well articulated, Scott. Absolutely fabulous points there. Let's also talk about the India-US relationship. The Prime Minister met Donald Trump just a few days ago. And obviously, the bonhomie, the friendship, the bond is palpable when these two meet. Is that going to percolate down to what the countries expect from each other in terms of people-to-people connection, as well as trade, economy, and business?
Definitely, I think that if you look at the world leaders, Trump and Prime Minister Modi's relationship is probably the strongest, warmest, and most sincere and deep of any world leader right now. And that serves India well, it serves the United States well, and I know that there are issues dealing with immigration, there's issues dealing with tariffs and trade, but I think that because Trump's is such a personal relationship-driven leader, that the warmth between these two, legitimate warmth between these two, will sort these issues out fairly quickly. Again, Trump eager to make changes, and his team eager to make changes, use some blunt instruments, and so I know that there's especially issues regarding Indian immigration and visas for Indian citizens in the United States, and hopefully that'll get resolved shortly. I'm sure there's going to be phone calls that'll take care of that.
Well, India has also expressed a bit of concern about, how Indian deportees were treated. In fact, there was quite a conversation about it back home, in the United States as well. People wanted to understand as to how does this really work. It was an area or an episode which brought to light illegal immigration, to another level. Do you think that is something that India should be worried about if it continues to happen? Because there are 18,000 deportees that are still waiting to be flown back to India. And if this treatment continues, then do you think is that going to be a problem?
What I'm hoping is that Prime Minister Modi is basically through his personal channels and hopefully diplomatic channels is making these concerns, raise these concerns. Because again, Indians who come to America to study and stay, I mean, almost all of my medical professionals that treat myself and my wife are from India. I mean, America would be very short on nurses and doctors and specialists if it wasn't for the Indian health professionals that have made America their home. And the same thing in our IT world. And so I think people realize that Indians, either as visitors, as students, or as immigrants, are a viable part of America's culture, America's economic, and certainly the health world and the IT world. So I think that if whatever has misfired, I think will get resolved quickly because it's in America's best interest.
What about the tariffs that are being announced by Donald Trump? Is that something that should be of concern? Do you think this reciprocity is going to be the new way of the world, and it eventually will force a lot of countries, perhaps even India, at some point in time in the future, to lower taxes?
A very good question. When you go back through American history, some of our most robust growth happened with very high tariffs. Now, as we were struggling early, basically a country in its infancy back in the early 19th century, we wanted to grow our indigenous industry, and we didn't want to be flooded with French and English and German goods. This is different now. And I think Trump is using it as a policy weapon, certainly with Mexico and Canada. As we move through the rest of the world, I think he's looking at what they call reciprocal or reciprocity. I don't personally know if India has tariffs on American goods coming into India, but that might be the lever that Trump will use to say, if you're charging us 20%, we're going to charge you 20%, which might then lead to both sides charging no percent. So I think Trump is a deal maker. That's how he made his wealth. He's a person who tries to build relationships and negotiate, which is his best-selling book, Art of the Deal. And so I think that, again, hopefully because of the warm relationships, personal relationship, there'll be enough back channels to sort this out. But I think that it harms America and it harms India if we start building trade walls.
Where do you see the India-United States relationship in the next 10 years? And, let me also throw in a caveat there. There seems to be a paradigm shift in the American policy towards Russia as well. India has always been allied with Russia. And if the Americans and the Soviets start to get along, it's a win-win situation for us.
Exactly. Well, the old Reagan coalition, which I was part of as a very young person, was very globalist, very outwardly focused. We helped take down the Soviet Empire in league with the Pope, John Paul II, and with Margaret Thatcher from England. And there was a very aggressive, holistic strategy that went into what America's role should be in the world. After the Berlin Wall fell, there was not much of a strategy. What do we do as a second act, so to speak? And that sort of hurt America through all sorts of different presidents. And now we're into, there's always been a strong isolationist thread within the Republican Party, and that seems to be manifesting itself as this America First approach that Trump has. And so you're seeing a step back of America. I think there'll be even more step backs of America, which could embolden China and other places. I think Trump will still want to support Israel. I think he's going to want to do what he can to even up through regime change in Iran. But you're right, in terms of Russia, he and Putin got along in his first term. India has always traditionally been closer to Russia than, and Pakistan was with China. And so I think that that may play a role. The other thing which I think comes through the next conference is that as America steps back, nature and politics abhor a vacuum. And so if America does step back, who takes that role? And if it's going to be Russia and China and radical Islam, that's a problem. If it's a democracy, free economy, open society like India, that's a good thing. So there's an opportunity here, as we've heard over the last 2 days, of India stepping forward, not only as the biggest population in the world, but as the most robust economy in the world, and having one of the most dynamic leaders in the world to step into this void. And so there's lots of opportunity for India to be a leader, and also to leverage the relationship with Trump to truly have the next decade be an amazing time for everybody.
Scott, one last question. Scholars and people who in fact observe the geopolitics landscape between the United States and India have always felt, and there is this notion in India, that when it's the Republicans, India and the United States get along. When it's the Democrats, there seem to be problems. You could go with that?
Possibly. I'm trying to think that when John F. Kennedy was president, we had John Kenneth Galbraith as ambassador, and I think there was a good relationship then. I think that the Democrats...
Not if you remember what Henry Kissinger said about Indira Gandhi.
What was that?
Well, he said a lot of nasty stuff about her. If Henry Kissinger said a lot of nasty stuff about...
Galbraith? Yeah, Galbraith?
Henry Kissinger said a lot of...
Well, again, Kissinger, you have to remember that, I'm not a big fan of Kissinger, by the way, but when Kissinger was looking at how do we open, and he thought that America was a declining power in the early 70s, and he wanted to do triangulation. He said, okay, China and Russia are different agendas, different players, different approaches to communism. If we can bring China onto the chessboard, I mean, his whole, he wrote an amazing book called The Congress of Vienna about the Napoleonic era, that his role of how he negotiated was overcomplicate things, bring in many, many pieces, many, many issues, many, many players, and in that confusion, in that clustering of things, you start to thread a policy that hopefully works for the United States. So he wanted to bring China in. The only way into China was through Pakistan. And so he began a very open relationship with Pakistan to open the doors to China. And then later on, when we had the Afghan war, Pakistan was the way in for America to support the Mujahideen and the other. I was more of a Northern Alliance person back then. But the issue is that Pakistan was always sort of tilted to China and that certain part of the American population. Nowadays, we realize how bad Pakistan is, not only the horrible Mumbai attack in your country, but the fact that they harbored bin Laden right under the nose of their own military, which was probably they knew about it. And so I think that certainly on the Republican side, we recognize that India is our true friend, and certainly going forward, it's the key partnership that's going to, I think, help not only this part of the world, but the world in general.
Scott, thank you so much. It's been an illuminating conversation. You shed light on a number of facets that everybody here is going to relish and take home with. Thank you so much.
It's an honor. Thank you very much.
Mrs. Scott Faulkner, thank you for joining us at the inaugural NXT Conclave. With that, we move on to our next session called Next in On